Imagine walking into a corporate boardroom, right?
Okay.
And realizing the multi-million-dollar American flag painting you just bought from a famous artist has a racial slur secretly woven into the stars.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is quite an image.
Today, we're looking at the artist who pulled off that exact Trojan horse maneuver. Welcome to this deep dive into the source material.
We are looking at the life, the legacy, and honestly, the absolute sheer force of nature that was American artist Faith Ringgold.
Right, who lived from 1930 to 2024. And the mission of this deep dive for you listening today is to see exactly how she took a lifetime of locked gates.
And there were a lot of them.
So many. People constantly telling her no because of her gender or her race or, even the medium she chose.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore how she completely rewrote the rules of the American art world to tell her own story. Okay, let's unpack this.
To really understand the mechanics of her rebellion, I think we have to start by setting the scene in 1930s Harlem.
Let's do it.
So, she was born Faith Willie Jones. And as a young girl, she suffered from chronic asthma.
Which was a big deal back then.
A huge deal. That meant she was frequently confined indoors while, the other kids were outside playing.
Right.
But rather than this being a tragic limitation, it actually functioned as a creative incubator.
Because of her parents, right?
Exactly. Her mother, Willie Posey, was a fashion designer. She gave her fabric scraps and crayons to just build her own worlds. And her father was this avid storyteller. He filled the apartment with narrative.
And you have to look at the environment pulsing right outside her window, too.
Oh, absolutely.
This is the tail end of the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, Duke Ellington and Langston Hughes lived just around the corner.
It's incredible.
Her childhood friend was Sonny Rollins, who would, go on to become a legendary jazz musician. Just imagine the sound of Sonny Rollins practicing the saxophone at your family's parties.
Right. The air was literally vibrating with Black excellence and cultural innovation. It was an incredibly rich cultural soil.
It really was.
And what is vital here is Ringgold's own perspective on her childhood, which the sources highlight clearly. She explicitly said that despite growing up in Great Depression-era Harlem, she felt, and this is a quote, protected from oppression and surrounded by a loving family.
That is such an important point.
It's a crucial mechanism for everything that follows.
Yeah.
That foundation of love and profound self-worth became the bedrock that fueled her fearlessness.
Right, because you cannot challenge towering systemic institutions unless you have a deep-seated belief that your voice actually matters.
Exactly.
But, that childhood confidence absolutely crashed into a brick wall of reality when she went to college.
Oh, yeah. A major reality check.
In 1948, she enrolled at the City College of New York with the intention of majoring in art, and the institution flat out refused her.
Just refused.
Yeah, they forced her to major in art education instead, simply because the college only allowed women to be enrolled in certain majors.
Right. Fine art was exclusively for the men. Women were expected to just, teach it to children.
It is a glaring structural roadblock.
It is. However, that specific friction birthed her politically charged painting career in the 1960s.
How so?
Well, because she was pushed to the margins, she didn't feel beholden to the traditional, sanitized subjects of the fine art world.
Ah, I see.
So drawing inspiration from writers like James Baldwin and Amiri Baraka, she began a collection called the American People series in 1963.
Which was super powerful.
Yeah, she was looking at the civil rights movement, but portraying it specifically from a female perspective, interrogating the bleeding edge of racial tension in the United States.
And she was doing all this while actively battling the gallery system at the same time.
Right.
A prominent New York gallery owner named Ruth White rejected her work outright, but that rejection functioned as a catalyst.
It forced her hand, in a way.
Exactly. Ringgold realized that given the turbulence of the 1960s, she couldn't just casually paint bowls of fruit or, serene landscapes. The atmosphere demanded a reaction.
And that realization led her to deconstruct the very techniques she was taught.
The actual painting techniques.
No. Yeah. She created the Blacklight series, which is sometimes called America Black.
Right.
See, in traditional Western art, there's an obsession with white light and chiaroscuro.
Which is the technique of using high contrast between light and dark to build three-dimensional volume, right?
Exactly. And Ringgold observed that this technique inherently privileged whiteness on the canvas.
Oh, wow. That's a profound observation.
It really is.
Yeah.
African cultures, by contrast, often use darker colors and emphasize bold, rhythmic color over tonality.
So she changed her whole palette.
She did. She pursued what she called a more affirmative black aesthetic, removing white paint from her palette entirely to explore the rich, deep hues of blackness.
Which brings a whole new visual language to her activism in the 1970s.
Definitely.
Just looking impartially at the historical facts of her political art during this era, we see a massive shift toward public engagement.
Right, like when she designed a free Angela Davis poster for the Black Panther Party.
Yeah, and then in 1971, she received her first public commission to create a mural for the women's facility on Rikers Island.
Titled For the Women's House.
Right.
This is widely regarded as her first major feminist work, and the execution is brilliant.
What made it so unique?
The mural is a fundamentally anti-carceral piece. Instead of focusing on punishment, it depicts women in professional, empowering roles.
Like driving buses, working as doctors.
Exactly, offering positive visual alternatives to the cycle of incarceration. And structurally, she didn't just paint a standard European tableau.
She divided it up, didn't she?
Yeah, she divided the portraits into triangular sections, which physically references Cuba textiles from the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Oh, I've seen those. The geometric raffia-woven patterns.
Right. By using that structure, she visually decentralized the composition, placing African design principles in a state-run American prison.
That is so intentional.
And crucially, the subject matter was based entirely on extensive interviews she conducted directly with the female inmates.
Talk about hiding a radical message right in plain sight. Which brings us back to that literal Trojan horse of fine art I mentioned at the top of the show.
Yes, this is a great story.
So in 1969, Ringgold created a piece in her Blacklight series inspired by the Apollo 11 moon landing. The title was Blacklight Series number 10, Flag for the Moon, Die Nigger.
And the historical context here is a perfect distillation of her subversive approach.
Just picture the tension in this room. David Rockefeller, the chief executive of Chase Manhattan Bank, and, a titan of the American establishment.
The ultimate establishment figure.
Right. He saw her work and sent representatives to buy a piece for the bank's corporate collection.
And they selected this exact moon landing flag painting.
They were standing there, checkbook ready, but at the absolute last second, Ringgold casually suggested they might actually want to read the text hidden in the composition.
Oh, man.
The reps stepped closer, their eyes adjusted to the optical illusion, and they realized the stars and stripes of the American flag were meticulously arranged to spell out a racial slur.
It's just brilliant.
They panicked, backed out of that specific painting, and bought a different piece from the series instead.
Wow.
So she successfully infiltrated the corporate collection, but she did it entirely on her own terms, proving she could play their game while simultaneously mocking it.
Absolutely. But, as the 1970s progressed, Ringgold recognized that the canvas itself was a tool of the establishment.
How do you mean?
Well, painting was deeply tied to a Western European male-dominated tradition. Even if she was painting subversive content, she was still playing on their field.
Wait, I'm struggling with this. She spends a decade fighting tooth and nail to get her canvas paintings taken seriously by this incredibly elite, snobby New York art establishment.
Yeah.
She gets into the Chase Manhattan collection, and then she pivots away from oil painting entirely to focus on fabric and quilts.
She does.
To the exact critics she was fighting, wouldn't that just hand them the perfect excuse to dismiss her work as women's crafts and lock her out of the fine art world forever?
What's fascinating here is the dual inspiration behind this shift and how it completely bypassed the Western fine art hierarchy you're talking about.
Okay.
The pivot wasn't a retreat, it was an escalation.
An escalation.
Yes. First, she took a trip to Europe in the summer of 1972. At the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, she saw a collection of 14th and 15th century Tibetan thangkas.
What are those?
They are exquisite, sacred Buddhist paintings mounted on rich textile backings rather than stretched over heavy wooden frames.
Oh, I see.
That gave her the visual vocabulary to put fabric borders around her own work. Second, she began collaborating with her mother, Willie Posey, the Harlem clothing designer.
Bringing it back to her roots.
Exactly. This directly connected her art to the African-American quilting tradition of her grandmother and her great-grandmother, Susie Shannon, who had been enslaved.
Wow.
She was fusing global sacred art history with her own deep family lineage.
And fusing those traditions also solved a massive logistical problem.
Oh, practically speaking, yes.
There is a brilliant feminist practicality to the quilt. With heavy wooden canvases, an artist often needs a team, or traditionally, a husband, to haul the work from studio to gallery.
Right, they're heavy and awkward.
But by using fabric, Ringgold claimed total physical autonomy. She could just roll up her massive quilts, tuck them under her arm, and walk into a gallery herself.
And the quilts also solved a narrative problem. Ringgold had been writing an autobiography, but mainstream publishers kept rejecting it.
Typical.
So instead of accepting the rejection, she weaponized the gallery space. She began writing her stories in Sharpie directly onto the fabric of these quilts.
That is so smart.
She figured that if she couldn't get a book deal, gallery goers would still be forced to stand there and read her story if they wanted to look at her art.
Her 1983 quilt, Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima, is a perfect example of this.
Yes.
She took a deeply malign, racist advertising stereotype and rewrote the character into a successful matriarch and restaurateur, completely reclaiming the narrative.
And the ultimate reclamation happens in her 1990s quilt series, The French Collection.
Oh, I love this one.
She invents a fictional black female painter named Julia Marie Simone. In the narrative woven into the quilts, Julia travels to France.
Right.
At first, she's depicted posing as a nude model for modernist giants like Pablo Picasso and Henri Matisse.
Which is how Black women were historically relegated in Western art, just passive subjects for white male geniuses.
Exactly. But then, in a quilt called Picnic at Giverny, which parodies Manet's famous Luncheon on the Grass, the fictional Julia turns the tables.
She becomes the active painter at the easel.
Yes, and she's painting a nude Picasso. Ringgold completely dismantles the male gaze by reversing the roles of creator and subject.
It is a stunning, imaginative rewriting of art history. But quilts, despite their narrative power, are still fundamentally flat objects hung on a wall.
Right.
Ringgold had a growing desire to bring these stories out into three-dimensional space, which pushed her into the realms of sculpture, performance art, and direct physical action.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Her soft sculptures.
Yes.
In 1973, she creates a soft sculpture called Wilt. The physical presence of this thing is wild.
It features the famous basketball player Wilt Chamberlain, right?
It does, along with a fictional white wife and a fictional mixed-race daughter. They had baked and painted coconut shell heads, soft foam, and rubber bodies.
Wow.
And they were hung from the ceiling on invisible fishing lines, so they would gently sway and move when you walked past them.
Looking at a towering 7'3" soft sculpture, you don't build something that massive and confrontational unless you are directly responding to a massive insult, right?
Precisely. Chamberlain had recently published his autobiography, and in it he made several highly publicized negative comments regarding African-American women.
And she wasn't going to just let that slide.
No. Ringgold decided to respond not with a standard op-ed or a flat painting, but with a towering physical work of art that invaded the viewer's space.
It forced a conversation about his statements by putting the physical manifestation of his rhetoric right in the middle of the room.
Exactly. And that desire to invade physical space naturally evolved into full-blown performance art.
Combining storytelling, dance, music, costumes, and these sculptural masks into living productions.
A major example from the sources is The Wake and Resurrection of the Bicentennial Negro in 1976.
This was a deeply complex, 30-minute multidisciplinary performance that utilized mime and music, right?
Yes. And to understand the mechanism of this piece, you have to look at the timing.
Right, the 1976 American Bicentennial.
Exactly. A time of massive national celebration. But the sources document her stance clearly. She voiced the opinion that there was no reason for Black Americans to celebrate 200 years of American independence, given that they had been enslaved for almost half of that time.
Just reporting the facts of her stance, the logic makes a lot of sense for her work.
It does. And by utilizing mime and masks, she stripped away language and forced the audience to process the visceral dynamics of racism and oppression.
Staging a mourning wake during a time of mandatory national jubilation creates a profound cognitive dissonance.
It really does. And she lived that dissonance out in the museums themselves. Ringgold was a fierce advocate for representation, taking her physical protests directly to the institutions that locked her out.
Like when she co-founded the Ad Hoc Women's Art Committee.
Yes. They actively protested a major modernist exhibition at the Whitney Museum because it excluded women and Black artists.
Even established legends like Jacob Lawrence were left off the roster.
It was egregious. And their protest tactics were incredibly disruptive.
They blew whistles, chanted, and left raw eggs and sanitary napkins on the pristine museum floor.
Right. Think about modern climate activists throwing soup at glass-covered paintings today. The mechanism is the same.
It is about disrupting the quiet sanctity of an exclusionary space. And she was actually arrested for this protest activity in 1970.
She was. She was demanding that women account for 50% of exhibitors. And when the mainstream institutions refused to listen, she focused her energy on building her own.
Right. She became a founding member of Where We At Black Women Artists.
And at their inaugural show, they made a deliberate choice to change the culture of the gallery space itself.
Instead of serving traditional high society champagne and hors d'oeuvres, they served soul food.
It was complete, unapologetic embrace of their cultural roots, signaling that they did not need to assimilate to be validated.
So she shakes up the elite art world, she protests the museums, she reinvents the quilt, she builds her own institutions.
And then, having conquered all of that, she takes her radical storytelling to perhaps the most influential, malleable audience of all children. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how natural and how brilliant this evolution was.
Because her quilts were already combining rich visual art with narrative text.
Right. Translating them into children's books allowed her to bypass the gallery system entirely and reach a massive global audience.
It allowed her to approach incredibly complex issues of racism, history, and identity with a straightforward, hopeful realism that children could intuitively understand.
She ended up writing and illustrating 17 children's books over her career.
The most famous is her very first one, Tar Beach, published in 1991.
Such a classic.
It's based directly on her story quilt about an 8-year-old girl named Cassie Louise Lightfoot. In the book, Cassie dreams of flying freely over her family's Harlem apartment building.
The tar beach of the roof.
Exactly, and claiming the rest of New York City, soaring over the George Washington Bridge. The visual of a young black girl flying is such a powerful metaphor for freedom and unbounded potential.
It's beautiful, and the book was a massive mainstream success. It won the Coretta Scott King Award for Illustration and was named a Caldecott Honor Book.
Think about the implications of that trajectory for you, the listener, in your own life. How do you handle rejection or being consistently overlooked?
Right. Look at the architecture of Ringgold's entire career. She wanted to be a fine art major. The establishment told her no, so she studied art education and used that pedagogical framework to fuel her voice.
She wrote an autobiography. Publishers rejected it, so she bypassed them and wrote it directly onto her quilts.
Decades later, those very quilts inspired a children's book that won major national awards.
She ended her career as a celebrated author and a tenured professor in the visual arts department at UC San Diego.
It is a masterclass in relentlessly adapting your medium without ever compromising your core message.
Looking at her life, from her birth in 1930 to her passing in 2024 at the age of 93, the sheer scale of her impact is staggering.
Unbelievable.
From an asthmatic child kept indoors in Harlem, to a museum disruptor throwing eggs on the floor, to an internationally renowned artist whose works now hang in the permanent collections of the MoMA and the Guggenheim. So what does this all mean?
This raises an important question about the profound power of owning your own narrative.
Yeah.
Faith Ringgold recognized early on that if you wait for the establishment to hand you a microphone or give you permission to enter their spaces, you might wait forever.
You really might.
You have to weave your own canvas, sew your own borders, and write your own story across it.
And once you weave that story, you defend it with everything you have. I want to leave you with one final, incredible detail from the source material that perfectly captures her spirit.
Oh, the court case.
Yes. Ringgold v. Black Entertainment Television.
This is legendary.
In the 1990s, the TV network Bet Red aired a sitcom called Rock. In the background of a scene, a poster of Ringgold's story quilt church picnic appeared on the wall.
Just in the background.
Right. It wasn't the focal point of the scene. In fact, across 9 different broadcast occasions, the poster was only visible on screen for a grand total of 26.75 seconds.
Less than half a minute of screen time.
Yet Ringgold sued Bet for copyright infringement.
Wow.
In court, Bet tried to use what's called a de minimis defense, basically arguing, come on, the appearance of the art was so minimal, so fleeting, it barely counts.
Right, it's trivial.
But the court rejected that defense, ruling in Ringgold's favor. Faith Ringgold spent her entire life fighting through locked gates, sexist policies, and systemic racism just to be seen.
She valued her own creative output so fiercely that she would take a major television network to federal court over 26 seconds of unauthorized use.
She knew exactly what her voice was worth, down to the fraction of a second.
That is so inspiring.
And as you go about your day, we want to challenge you to think about that. How fiercely do you value your own work? Are you willing to defend your voice, your ideas, and your output, even when the world tries to tell you it's too small to matter?
Take a page from Faith Ringgold. Don't wait for permission.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the source material with us today. Keep creating, keep questioning, and we'll catch you next time.